everything in the right place. So in that sense, it doesn't mean simply rejecting. Come on in, we still have a few seats left. So, there's another word in Sanskrit, tyaga. Tyaga simply means to reject something. Whereas sannyasa means putting everything in the right place. So, ultimately, Krishna teaches that the right place for everything is in the service to God. So we also find in Bhagavad Gita not only the noun sannyasa, but also the verb sannyasya, which means, and Krishna says, Mai sannyasya, you should offer everything to me. So, the idea of serving God is, Prabhupada actually gave a structural argument. In the sense that just as the hand is part of the body, so the hand always serves the body, so we are all part of God. Krishna explains this in the Bhagavad Gita, I think it's, 15:7. Mamaivang sajiva loke jiva bhuta sanatana manakshashtani indriyani bhaktisari karshi. Krishna says that every living thing is actually part of me. Now, being part of Krishna is not exactly, in every sense, like the hand is part of the body. So that analogy is valid in the sense that the hand is always serving the body, and we always serve Krishna because we're part of Krishna. The analogy is not applicable if we consider that the body is simply the sum total of all of its parts. Whereas Krishna has his own complete existence apart from us. Otherwise, we could say that because we're part of God, if we take everyone away, there's no God left. Just like if you take away all the parts of the body, there's no body. So this is kind of, I don't know what you call it, transcendental physics. And this point is actually explained in the invocation to Sri Isopanishad. Om Purnamadak Purnamidam Purna Purnamudachyate. Purna in Sanskrit means full or complete. And therefore the full moon is called Purnima, a word which has been brutalized in the Western world and has come out as Purnim or something like that. Poor word. So, but it actually is from the Sanskrit word Purna, which means full or complete, and Purnima means the full moon, actually. So Lord Chaitanya appeared in the full moon, therefore it's called Lord Purnima. But the word Purna means complete, full. So the Upanishad says Purnam Om Purnamidam Purnamada. There, how should I put it? The intellectual history of India is very impressive. Because whatever ideas we express, whatever arguments we give, whatever description we give is always done with language. And so therefore, in ancient India there was an extraordinary amount of attention given to language. Especially because in India, as in other parts of the world, people were convinced that they actually had a body of literature which was sacred. called the Vedas. So is that an upgrade? Oh, thank you. Business class, Carmen. Oh, okay. Thank you.
Hello.
So, I'm going to take 5 minutes to smell this car. So, it's very interesting going to the source of things. In India, there was this very precocious or very impressive focus on the source of everything. So, because all ideas are expressed in language, they wanted to study language itself. And it's not an exaggeration to say that the linguistics, the study of linguistics was literally thousands of years ahead in India compared to other parts of the world. In fact, the modern study of phonology or phonetics was actually created by the discovery of the Sanskrit alphabet. Because the Sanskrit alphabet, I mean, I won't explain all the details here unless you pay me more. But I'm just kidding. But the Sanskrit alphabet chart is actually a scientific phonetic chart. So, so just as they studied the source of all expression, the source of all conceptualization, also, whatever we think, whatever we conceive, we also do through consciousness. So just as language is fundamental and in a sense the source of all kinds of conceiving and expressing, so in the same way, consciousness is obviously a precondition even for language. And therefore, there was also a profound study of consciousness itself, which is the instrument of all other kinds of knowledge. Actually, in Europe, someone also kind of had that idea. Dr. René Descartes. Anyway, he was a French philosopher, Descartes. He didn't know he was in the Hare Krishna movement. So maybe I'll just say a word about Descartes. And Descartes did something in the 1600s which was revolutionary in its time. Because in the 1600s, the world, at least Europe, was still completely under the control of Richards. And people were expected to agree with what their church told them. And they weren't expected to think very much. This seems to be an ongoing problem with religious institutions. Anyway. So Descartes said, whatever I think I know, I could doubt that I might think I know something, but I actually might not know it. I might be mistaken. So what if I doubt everything? What if I begin, Hare Krishna, what if I begin what he called a meditation, but as a starting condition of this meditation, I'm going to imagine that everything I think I know may not be true. And these, of course, are Descartes' famous meditations. So it's interesting because first Descartes sort of not rejects, but doubts everything. And then he has to restore knowledge, but on a very solid, rational basis, which cannot be logically doubted. So that was the Descartes project. And as he meditated, he came to a conclusion which is very famous. And which, in those days, people wrote in Latin so that people in other parts of Europe could understand that. Now people just tweet. But anyway, so Descartes decided that there was, to begin, there was something he could not possibly rationally doubt. And that is that he himself was conscious. Because the very act of doubting means that he must be conscious, because unconscious people don't doubt anything. So therefore, Descartes said, cogito ergo sum. Cogito means I'm conscious, ergo, therefore, sum, I exist. But, and then he went on to recover other kinds of knowledge, including God. But the reason I think this is interesting is because at that time in Europe, in England, there was another important thinker who did something very different. And that was Sir Francis Bacon. Sort of a non-vegetarian name. So, Sir Francis Bacon also wanted to find the basis of true, reliable knowledge. But he said that the basis of reliable knowledge is not within, it's actually outside. And it was this person who actually developed what we now call the scientific method. So you have Bacon going outside and Descartes going inside. So what is our position? Interestingly, we go both ways. Because even in Europe, with the Renaissance, there was the notion of natural theology. And natural theology was the idea that in the Middle Ages they said we have one reliable book of knowledge, which is the Bible. Of course, by the time you get to the High Middle Ages, they're kind of cheating because, like Thomas Aquinas said, wrote his book based on Aristotle. As it said, Aquinas baptized Aristotle. Yes, Saint Aristotle. So, but with the Renaissance, people said actually God gave us two books, and that is the Bible and the book of nature. And this goes back to a much older idea in the classical world, which is very relevant to us in Christian consciousness. I would, first I'll just mention that as devotees, of course, we meditate, try to find Krishna in their heart. As Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Jomam Pashyati Sarvatra, one who sees me everywhere. And Nanjo Mai Sarvam Pashati, one who sees everything in me. So, but now, this ancient idea was held by philosophers such as the Stoics and other groups, and it was based on the concept of logos. Or as if we had someone from Greece here, they would say, no, it's logos. But since there are no Greek people, oh, sorry about that. So, anyway, logos. So, this ancient idea was that God is a rational creature. Well, actually not a creature. God is a rational. Sorry about that. Don't. So, yeah, God is a rational being, and within the mind of God there is this infinite reason, which is the logos. And when God creates the world, both ourselves and other parts of nature, God actually places this logos in the creation. In fact, and the logos is also within us. Therefore, we are capable of reason. We are capable of being intelligent and not stupid. In our better days, right? And so, and that's why all the different sciences are called, all like ology, like physiology, the logos of the physical, or geology, the logos of the earth, or biology, Greek bios. Bios is life, so biology, the logos of life. Actually, I always mention this, it's really funny, that the one academic discipline that really feels they were cheated is the astronomers, because they didn't get theology work. Astrology. They're actually very frustrated about this, and they probably will be for centuries to come. Because every other university department gets an ology word except them. Anyway, so the idea is that because the logos is within us, and because it's in nature, because everything comes from the mind of God, therefore we can study nature and understand the mind of God. And for example, Sir Isaac Newton, that was exactly what he was doing. Trying to understand the mind of God by studying the cosmos. But, so we're going back, okay, so we've discussed language and consciousness. So I'm going to talk a little more about this logos and talk about how it occurs in Bhagavad Gita with a different word, but it's the same idea. And then how that relates to what I was saying before about language and consciousness. Perhaps the word in Sanskrit, which perhaps the word that comes closest in this context, or one of the words, is buddhi. Buddhi. Obviously made from the Sanskrit root bud, the same root from which you get the word Buddha. And so, Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Buddhir buddhi matam asmi, that I am the buddhi, I am the reason, I am the intelligence of intelligent people. So remember this ancient Greco-Roman idea that God invests His own divine reason in us. And Krishna says exactly the same thing in Bhagavad Gita. So, in the Bhagavad Gita 10:10, very famous verse, Krishna says that Tesham Satata Jutanam Bhajatam Priti Purvakam Yogam Tam Gina Mam Upajanti. He says, for those people, Tesham, for those people, Satata Jutanam, who are always engaged in Bhakti Yoga, Tesham Satata Jutanam Bhajatam Priti Purvakam, and worshiping with love. Krishna says, I give them something by which they come to me. So what is Krishna giving? What's the magic thing that Krishna gives us by which we come to him? It's actually buddhi. It's intelligence. It's reason, the power to think clearly and make relevant distinctions. So it's interesting. And if you look at the whole structure of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna never said to Arjuna that if you don't surrender me, I'm going to torture you. Or if you don't surrender to me, you'll go to hell. Actually, Krishna is quite liberal. I don't mean liberal political party. I know there's an election today. I don't want to say who Krishna would vote for. Still going on. Still going on. Well, thank you for coming, Grant. So, Krishna actually wants us to be intelligent. He doesn't want us to be foolish. He doesn't want us to be fanatical. So, for example, many of us here, follow Srila Prabhupada. So, if you study the history of religion, and actually the sociology of religion, what you find is that after the passing of a charismatic leader, there is a tendency to mythologize that leader. This analysis was really first given very clearly by the German sociologist Max Weber, who was a real pioneer in the sociology of religion. So here the word charisma, Greek word, right? It's used in the ancient sense to mean sort of like a divine gift, a divine empowerment. And it's very much like in the Sanskrit term Shakti Avesh. Shakti means power, and Avesh means investing. And so Shakti Avesh means that God invests divine power in a person. So the ancient Greek word charisma is similar in this context of the sociology of religion. So it's actually, I think we can actually demonstrate logically that when Prabhupada was here, many of his disciples were attached to his external form. I mean, in a sense, everyone was attached to his external manifest presence. But Prabhupada himself kept emphasizing that it was more advanced to understand him through his teachings. So, for example, when Prabhupada was here, he always had to remind his disciples, not all of them, many of them, to read his book, because many of them were not actually interested in theology. I mean, they liked to chant Hare Krishna, but they were not really theologians. And when Prabhupada left and his physical presence was no longer there, many of his disciples gradually also gave up their service. So this is normal. This you find throughout the history of religion. So, when a charismatic leader creates or begins a new spiritual religious movement, and when the followers are convinced that somehow divine power is coming through that person, and because divine power is superior to every other power, the followers accept that person as an absolute authority, that all authority is in that person. And this is very much what happened in the early days of ISKCON. It's actually what happened in the early days of the Jesus movement, and so on. So when the leader passes away, this creates a crisis for the community. Because since most human beings are not intellectual, they're not philosophical, although they be pious. And therefore, most human beings depend upon the physical presence. So when that physical presence is not there, then what do? So Max Weber points out, and this is pretty much accepted now by all sociologists of religion, that the survival of a religious movement when the charismatic leader passes away depends upon the ability of that movement to channel and transform the leader's authority into a rational institution. I mean, you can see this actually in the movement of St. Francis of Assisi. Yeah, everyone here knows St. Francis of Assisi. St. Francis was, what's the word? Unusual. In that he went around naked in Italy. And I would like to remind you that Italy is not a tropical country. And it gets very cold in Italy, just like it gets cold here. And in fact, they say that Francis died early because if you just sleep outside in the winter in Italy, you also will probably die young. But what's interesting, don't try this. Don't try this in Serbia. So, but what's interesting is that the followers of St. Francis, even during his life, realized the need to create a better organization. Like Francis said, what's the problem? Let's just all walk around naked preaching. And even his own followers said, I don't think so, Francis. So they, with all due respect, they actually formed an institution and buildings where they could actually have a roof over their head and light a fire in the winter. And so the Franciscan order survived because his followers created a rational structure that could serve as a vehicle for his ideals. And of course, Prabhupada himself wanted us to form an institution because, many people, they're what I call their inner hippie. May not want an institution. But history shows that without it, it's just really not possible to systematically teach the world. It's like if someone's a doctor but says, I don't like institutions, so there shouldn't be any hospitals, there shouldn't be any medical colleges, can't we just all heal? Let's just all heal. No, it's bona fide to laugh at my jokes. Completely bona fide. In fact, Krishna will be very pleased with you. So, in the case of Prabhupada, how should I put it? Well, first, in general, when a charismatic leader leaves this world, because many of the followers feel a real loss and they feel a need to compensate for that loss. And they, in a sense, for many followers who were very attached to that external form of their leader, whether it's Jesus or Buddha or Prabhupada or whatever, they cannot fully compensate, they believe, simply by being members of an institution in the name of the founder. So they often, or like in the case of ISKCON, most of them agreed to be part of that because it was Prabhupada's wish, but they're not, and as you see, on an emotional level, or in terms of how they perceive their own spiritual life, they're not fully satisfied. And so, therefore, throughout the history of religion, there is a tendency to mythologize the leader. Because as you lose the physical presence, you have to gain something in return. And so you gain something by mythologizing the leader. And I say mythologize in the sense of beginning to see the leader in a way that the leader didn't even see himself. So, in the case of Prabhupada, by the way, this lecture is not going to reveal to you that I'm a complete deviant. Which may disappoint some people, I guess, but at the end we're still going to be like, Hare Krishna. But so I would like to give you a little bit of ISKCON history. Because, as they say, people that don't study history often are, condemned to do really foolish things that they wouldn't do if they knew history. And so, in the early days of the movement, I believe, it's my own view, that in terms of ISKCON, that there was a golden age of the Hare Krishna movement in the Western world. And that golden age was the time, let's say roughly from 1966 to about 1970, really, our Camelot moment. It was the time when Prabhupada lived in the West. He actually, for a lot of the time, he lived in the city I was born, Los Angeles, right? California. So, wish they all could be California gurus. So, anyway, so for those 4 years, Prabhupada lived in the United States and also traveled Europe, and he was really focused on Western preaching. And it is kind of funny. And I know each other. But so there are two important historical points here about those 4 years. Number one, perhaps I should start with this. The movement wasn't so large. And because the Hare Krishna movement wasn't very big, Prabhupada actually knew all of his disciples. And they actually knew him. In other words, they weren't just hearing from people who heard from people who heard from people. Everyone actually knew Prabhupada. And also Prabhupada lived in the West. Now, I think it's very instructive. In 1970, Prabhupada went to India, and from that time on, he still spent time in the West, but the movement gradually shifted its center of gravity to India, with all kinds of consequences. But if you look at that period, 1966 to 1970, when Prabhupada knew all of his disciples, they all knew him, and he lived in the West and saw personally what was going on in the West. I would claim, and I think this is a valid historical claim, that three relationships were different than they later. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because my real intention is trying to get back to Western Krishna movement that Prabhupada actually personally created, which is the Hare Krishna movement that's going to be very successful in the Western countries. So, three different relationships, I think, were different than they became in the years following that. And these relationships are the relationship between Prabhupada and his disciples, the relationship between devotees, and the relationship between devotees and the public. And so, first, I want to go through those three relationships. And you can verify this, by the way, simply by reading the biographies of Prabhupada, such as the biography by Mukunda Goswami, or Guru Das, or Lilamrita. There are many reliable biographies that will actually give you this information. What I've done as someone sort of trained in history is that I've taken all this information and I've tried to explain it in a logical way that's relevant to what we're trying to do in Serbia and many other Western countries. So if you look at the relationship between Prabhupada and his disciples back then, the devotees accepted Prabhupada as a pure devotee. They knew that Krishna had sent Prabhupada here to teach us and save us and empower us to save other people. People, devotees knew that. There's no doubt about that. But at the same time, Prabhupada personally took the role of what he was, a pure devotee, a pure guru. He did not take the role of managing everyone's life. And now, in the early days in New York, of course, devotees literally didn't even know how to clean themselves, or how to cook vegetarian food. And so obviously Prabhupada had to explain those things. So if you look at the transition, now we're talking roughly about a 4-year period from 1966 to 1970. And even within that 4-year period, you see a clear transition. Once Prabhupada explains these basic things, like this is how you play the drum, this is how you cook vegetarian food, and this is how you clean yourself, and so on, then Prabhupada no longer played that role. In fact, he trusted his disciples to figure out relevant preaching strategies in their own country, rather than... I'll give you an example. When the devotees, Mukunda Goswami actually, when Mukunda Goswami rented the first real Hare Krishna temple, ISKCON temple in the world at 26 2nd Avenue, it's not that Prabhupada told him, as a type of Shiro Dakshai Vishnu Jr., like a super soul, go to the Lower East Side of New York, there you will find devotees. No, it wasn't like that at all. It was just that the devotees told Prabhupada that this is the best place in New York right now. And the devotees went there. Prabhupada went there. Then, for example, after a while, the devotees told Prabhupada, something very important is happening in San Francisco. And we need to be there. And so Prabhupada authorized a few disciples to go because that was their idea. And then they invited Prabhupada, and there was this incredible reception, and all the famous rock and roll bands at the time, a concert for Prabhupada, and so on. But it was the devotees telling Prabhupada, 26 2nd Avenue, we need to go to San Francisco. And you see pictures of Prabhupada with his disciples, his leading disciples, the ones who are taking care of him and leading the movement, and they're dressed like I am now. Not quite as fashionably, but that's different. So you can't expect everyone to be quite as fashionable. So, and Prabhupada is really happy because the last thing in the world Prabhupada wants to do is tell everybody how to do practical preaching strategies in their country. But now, something, actually, at around 1970, two things start to change. And these are dramatic changes. One thing is, the movement starts to grow very explosively. In fact, there's a book called The Hare Krishna Explosion. And so, the good news is, the movement grew very quickly. The bad news is, the movement grew very quickly. Because within a year or two, say 2 years, you have a situation where, unlike the past, where practically all the devotees know Prabhupada and he knows them, you get to a situation where actually only a small minority of devotees know Prabhupada. And Prabhupada himself only knows a small minority of devotees. And so I mentioned the point about losing the personal association, physical presence of the Guru when he passes away. But I think one could make a very clear argument, according to social science and history, that as the movement grew very quickly, it was like a preliminary stage of losing Prabhupada's personal association. Because the movement was very different. And that the process of mythologizing actually began then. Because, I mean, if you look at traditional religions, if you look at, let's say, the early days of the Jesus movement, or the early days of Buddhism, or other movements, or the early days of Islam, for example, what we find in all these religions is that people didn't take commercial flights. They didn't drive cars. They didn't even have speedboats. And so therefore, even if a movement grew quickly, such as, well, the Jesus movement didn't grow quickly because of various historical problems, but that's another topic. Even if a movement began to grow, still everybody kind of lived in the same part of the world. And therefore people could still associate. So that, for example, Paul, the Apostle Paul, basically traveled all around the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire was a very big empire, and yet one person in a year or two could just go around the whole empire. So everyone was kind of, and that's just walking, or, I don't know, a donkey cart or something. And so, but in this age, when you have an international movement, you have people in countries where Prabhupada never will come. And for example, Prabhupada in 1974 asked me to be GBC, the leader of Latin America. And Latin America is not a rich part of the world. And so most of Prabhupada's disciples in that part of the world never met him. They never met him. I mean, personally, met him through his teachings and so on, but never actually met him. And so, therefore, the stage of losing the personal association in the Jet Age, in the modern age, actually began when Prabhupada was still here. And the process of mythologizing, you got it, right? The process of mythologizing also begins. So, for example, if you look at Prabhupada's teachings, let's look at one English word and how Prabhupada uses it. And that's the English word opinion. So if you look at how Prabhupada uses the word opinion, there are two different boxes. I mean, there are two different categories. There's Prabhupada saying, I never gave my opinion. This is not my opinion. This is the fact. Or Prabhupada was lecturing and giving our philosophy, and someone said, well, your opinion, he would cut them off. No, it's not my opinion. This is the fact. But then you have many other Prabhupada statements where he says, well, my opinion is, or in my opinion, well, that's just my opinion. So what is this? Again, some people just look through the books and quote Prabhupada and have absolutely no idea that somewhere else Prabhupada said something very different. So sometimes instead of philosophy, among devotees, it's like the battle of Prabhupada quotes. Like two armies throwing Prabhupada quotes at each other over the internet. Which is a poor substitute for actually doing philosophy. Interestingly, Prabhupada said that we need religion and philosophy together. And many devotees believe that what Prabhupada meant is religion and philosophy. Religion, worship Krishna; philosophy, memorize our doctrine. So if you memorize the doctrine, you can pass a little test like A, we are the body; B, we are not the body. Oh, it's B. Or Krishna is an incarnation of Vishnu, or B, Vishnu is an incarnation of Krishna. No, B, Vishnu is an incarnation of Krishna. So some people think that if you just kind of learn these things, then you have actually successfully combined religion and philosophy. But, sorry, that's not what Prabhupada meant. And because I actually looked it up, I actually studied this, and I've given quotations in one of the papers I've written. Prabhupada meant philosophy the same way everybody else uses the word, like in universities. It's not that you have to combine religion with Socrates or religion with, I don't know, Hegel or something. It means that you have to have the ability to be reasonable. You have to be able to make good arguments and identify bad arguments, understand simple principles of logic. So, for example, it's a simple principle of logic that because Prabhupada often speaks in paradoxes, you have to look at everything he says on a subject. A paradox is an apparent contradiction, which, when you study it closer, is not a contradiction. It's a common technique used in wisdom literature. It's like a sort of a literary speed bump. You know the speed bump? So you have to slow down and look at what's there. So Prabhupada says, I never gave my opinion, and Prabhupada says often that, well, this is my opinion. So to understand this, if you look, let me see, there is a verse from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, which Prabhupada quotes about 200 times in the Vedas. It's not like I found one quotation somewhere. No, this is 200 times. And it's the verse, Jare dako tare kaha Krishna upadesh amar agyai guru hoy tare desh. Where Lord Chaitanya told a South Indian Brahmin that whomever you meet, Jare dako, tare kaha, tell that person Krishna upadesh, Krishna's teaching. And amar agyai, by my order, guru hoy, become a guru, Tare Desh, save this land. So, what's interesting is that I actually read in the database every time Prabhupada quoted this, like 200 times. He quoted it in classes, in morning walks, in press conferences, darshans, in every possible venue. He quoted this. And Prabhupada had tremendous, how should I put it, discipline in his messaging. Prabhupada always stayed on message. And so there were a few things he always said about this verse. One thing is that that it's not hard to be a guru. I mean, we also shouldn't mythologize the position of guru. I mean, I think I'm a bona fide guru. My friends think I am. And I can honestly tell you, I don't really know very much about UFOs, or the lost city of Atlantis, or the future, or anyway. I think some people actually think they do know these things. So, the job description of a bona fide guru is very simple. It's to train people or teach people to serve Prabhupada. Prabhupada explains this in the chapter 6 of the Nectar of Devotion of your Prabhupada says in chapter 6 of the Nectar of Devotion that the duty of a disciple is to follow in the footsteps of a bona fide guru. Correction. The duty of a disciple is to follow great acharyas under the guidance of a bona fide guru. So the way I explain this, imagine that Kali Yuga, this age is like a big jungle. And then Prabhupada came down with this Vaikuntha bulldozer. Oh, I've got the same one, it's good. Globalization makes life easier. And so, Prabhupada came down with this big Vaikuntha bulldozer and just created this super highway back to Godhead. The duty of a guru is simply to help you on that road. The guru doesn't have his own path. He doesn't have his own process. The guru is simply someone who is experienced in serving Prabhupada and helps other people to serve Prabhupada. And if we serve Prabhupada nicely, then we will go back to Krishna. It's actually very simple. And it's the duty of a guru not to keep his disciples in a perpetual state of childhood. In other words, it's not that the guru is pleased to see that you simply obey everything he says and you don't commit the sin of thinking. It's like, for example, good parents, they want their children to grow and be mature and become intelligent. So a bona fide guru wants to see the disciple grow up and become autonomous. Not, it's just like parents that want to keep their children under their control in everything. They're not very good parents. And parents, they can threaten that if you don't do what I say, you'll lose your inheritance. And a guru can threaten if you don't do what I say, that Krishna, you won't go to Krishna. So it's not the duty of a guru to threaten people into always just blindly following and not thinking themselves. That's not how it really works. Prabhupada himself said that the whole purpose of ISKCON is to train devotees to be independently thoughtful. It doesn't mean we create our own philosophy, or we reject Krishna, and it doesn't mean we offend the guru. It just means that you act like an adult, and you develop your program. So if you look at Prabhupada, when Prabhupada was actually in the West, again, that's what devotees were doing. Devotees were creative. Devotees told Prabhupada, this is the best way to preach in America. And of course, Prabhupada, if he thought something was really going too far, he would say something. Basically, if the devotees' suggestions weren't crazy, he would just do what they wanted because they knew their country. So, anyway, the movement grew very quickly. People didn't know Prabhupada. They started to mythologize him. And so, a point I want to make here about Prabhupada is, unfortunately, I'm the last active preacher in the Hare Krishna movement that was trained by Prabhupada as a Western GBC. There are no members today of the GBC who were trained by Prabhupada as a Western GBC. So I feel it's my duty to explain some of these things. In fact, when Prabhupada, as the movement grew so quickly, and devotees kept asking Prabhupada how to do this, how to do that, and devotees were sometimes, because they were young, everyone was young, sometimes they had trouble among themselves. You see this also in the early Jesus movement. I mean, from the letters of Paul, he's always trying to stop the early followers from fighting with each other. And Prabhupada, but when Prabhupada was in that role, when Prabhupada was in the role of having to personally tell people how, how to manage and how to preach in their country, he didn't like it. He kept complaining over and over again, just let me sit down and write my books. I don't want to do this. So, the idea of Prabhupada as materially omniscient, as materially infallible, is an idea that Prabhupada himself rejected. Prabhupada himself rejected it. And so, again, going back to those verses when he taught Amara Agyai, Prabhupada says you can be a guru because what I say must be true if and when I am repeating what Krishna said. The guru speaks infallibly, not because the guru was some type of mystic junior god, but the guru speaks infallibly for the simple reason that the guru repeats what Krishna said, and God is infallible. And so, I'm trying to get back to the Western Hare Krishna movement that Prabhupada personally set up when he lived in the West. It's a movement where we follow principles, but that we encourage people to be leaders, not just followers. We encourage devotees to be creative, to use their abilities. And so getting back to those three relationships I talked about, I believe if you do that, if devotees faithfully serve Prabhupada and his mission, but at the same time realize that Prabhupada wants you to be an adult. Prabhupada wants you to cooperate, obviously, with others. I mean, we need teamwork. We need devotees to cooperate. We should be humble, but at the same time, an adult community where everyone is encouraged to be a leader, everyone is encouraged to be intelligent, everyone is encouraged to bring their ideas. That's the movement that Prabhupada created. So what you find is that as Prabhupada starts to become more distant from the temples, for the simple reason that there are so many temples that it's humanly impossible to visit all of them. And even when Prabhupada does visit, there's so many devotees, he may stay a few days. So it's actually in that atmosphere when there's more and more power, because there's more people, there's more money, there are more buildings, and there's less Prabhupada, that you start, the relations between devotees start to change. They become more hierarchical. And some leader thinks that I should tell everybody what to do. There's a quote directly from Prabhupada, which is actually in the paper I wrote, where Prabhupada says that I started this movement so that to make people independently thoughtful. Not blindly submissive, but independently thoughtful. I mean, obviously, to be part of Prabhupada's mission, you have to accept Prabhupada. You have to accept Krishna. You have to accept these books. So we're not talking about intellectual anarchy. We're not talking about everyone creating their own religion. And it's also not political anarchy. Prabhupada created a structure. Bless you. So, again, this is not anarchy. I'm not going to an extreme of chaos and anarchy. There are three things that Prabhupada didn't want us to change. I should explain this. Because sometimes in ISKCON there's so much this idea that you can't breathe differently than you were taught to breathe. That, again, look, here's another Prabhupada paradox. An apparent contradiction which forces us to think. Which forces us to think. We have statements from Prabhupada saying, don't change anything. Just take what I gave you, don't change anything. And we have statements from Prabhupada saying, adjust everything. Make every necessary adjustment. Take all risks. So how do we combine these two things? Well, we have to think. Not just blindly quote something Prabhupada said, which some people, practically in industry, just holding up this quote, holding up that quote. You actually have to think. So the way we resolve both these quotations of Prabhupada is by understanding that there are three things that Prabhupada did not want you to change. If you change these things, you invalidate your warranty, your spiritual warranty. Go back to God. Garancy, yes. So those three things are: number one, our philosophy. You can't change our philosophy. But again, philosophy is not details like how you dress and what kind of recipes you use. That's not philosophy. Philosophy, the word in Sanskrit that's often used by the acharyas is siddhanta. Siddhanta means a philosophical conclusion. For example, that Krishna is the original form of God is a siddhanta. Boga, God, right? Yeah. That we are not this body is siddhanta. Or that, that we can return to Krishna by the process of pure devotional service, that is siddhanta. Also, basic philosophy is expressed by the word tattva. You've heard the word Sanskrit word tattva. Anyway, I won't go into it. It's very interesting historical etymology, but I'll go on. So the word tattva means a fundamental ontological truth. In other words, one of the fundamental categories of real things. So in this universe, there are three fundamental real things, which are God, the soul, and nature. Everything that goes on in the universe is just a combination of three fundamental real things. So therefore they're called Vishnu Tattva, Jiva Tattva, or Prakriti Tattva, because that's what Tattva means. A fundamental category of real things. And in the verse Bhagavad Gita 4:34, learn the truth from the seers of the truth. Seers of the truth literally is seers of tattva. That's actually what Krishna says. So in that sense, Prabhupada insisted that we cannot change siddhanta and tattva. We cannot change the truth. You can't change the truth. For example, I can't change the fact that Belgrade is in Serbia. I can say, no, it's actually in, I don't know, Argentina. But it's not. It's really in Serbia. And so, in the same way, you can't change the nature of the soul and God and nature itself. So that's the first thing Prabhupada said you can't change. You can't change our philosophy because it's coming from God. The second thing you can't change is our spiritual practice. We chant Hare Krishna. It's just what we do. If someone says we should chant something else, no, we have to chant Hare Krishna. And so we have what is called sadhana bhakti. Sadhana bhakti. That we do kirtan. And obviously the most important part of sadhana bhakti is the part of it that Prabhupada required in the initiation vow. I mean, we know we should read books, we should do kirtan, we should associate with devotees. But Prabhupada said there are two things that are most important, which we chant 16 rounds, we follow 4 principles. That's the initiation vow. So, the second thing that we cannot change is our process. The process that Prabhupada gave us. The third thing that we should not change, because Prabhupada was very serious about this, is our institution. ISKCON doesn't belong to me or doesn't belong to some leader or temple president or GBC or guru or sannyasi. It belongs to Prabhupada. It actually belongs to Prabhupada. Some people perhaps need to remember that.
Може се neki ljudi toga ne sjećaju.
So, and Prabhupada works, so if I see something in ISKCON, for example, that I think is not the way it should be,
Mislim da nije način na koji
my duty to Prabhupada is to try to fix it.
Ja idem u
Because I know very well,
da sredim.
having been trained by Prabhupada, that if I went to Prabhupada and told him there's this and that problem, Prabhupada would say to me,
Ovaj problem, on bi mi rekao,
then fix it.
onda gre.
So that's what I'm trying to fix things I believe need to be fixed. So, those are the three things that Prabhupada absolutely did not want us to change. Our philosophy, our spiritual practice, and our institution. As far as other details, he urged us to adjust them so that we could communicate with and reach people in the Western world. Prabhupada, for example, in his purport to the Bhagavatam 4.854, you can read this. Prabhupada says that people who think that in these details, everything in the West has to be done like it is in India, Prabhupada said they are puffed up with concocted notions. That's Prabhupada. So some people say, well, like for example, some people say we dress like Krishna. When you think about it, it's really kind of bizarre. I mean, Krishna never said in Bhagavad Gita, always think of me, dress like me, and you will come to me. Of course, it gets into details like, I mean, what would you all think if I came here with a peacock feather in my hair? Or perhaps no shirt. I mean, obviously at my age, I'm not very sexy, so that's very obvious. So I mean, what does it mean? And not only that, if I'm going to dress like Krishna, even though Krishna never asked me to, and I think it's kind of absurd, isn't it obvious that I should dress like Krishna did in this age? Because this is Kali Yuga. So why dress like Krishna in Dwapara Yuga? Why not dress like Krishna in Kali Yuga? After all, the Bhagavatam says that when Krishna comes to this world, Nato Natya Taro Jata. You translate. Krishna, that means that Krishna comes like an actor in costume. In other words, Krishna adjusts to the culture he's in. He fits in. So, since we're trying to fit into this age, we should dress like Krishna in this age. If we're going to dress like Krishna. But in fact, Prabhupada rejected that. Prabhupada rejected that. Look at how Prabhupada dressed, and look at how Lord Chaitanya dressed on the cover of BBT books. They dress very differently. Prabhupada once said to me, we were walking together in Mayapur, and Prabhupada said to me, should I be a fool and imitate Lord Chaitanya? Because he was being criticized by some incredibly intelligent people in India because he was flying around on jet planes instead of walking like Lord Chaitanya. And Prabhupada said, I would be a fool to imitate Lord Chaitanya's lifestyle. So if you want to dress like Krishna, why don't you also live like Krishna and give up your computer and your cell phone? And you should never again in your life use a motorized vehicle. No cars, no trains, no airplanes, no telephones. If you want to be like Krishna. So, anyway, I've written papers, I've given so many Prabhupada quotes. We have to keep Prabhupada in the center of ISKCON, but we have to know who Prabhupada is. And we can't filter out half of Prabhupada because we have another idea. So, Serbia, actually I really like Serbia. It's, I've seen most of Serbia between the airport and here. I also, what's that city I saw from the air? Yeah, I flew right over. At first I thought it was Belgrade, but then I realized the plane wasn't stopping, so they can't be Belgrade. They had two nice bridges, by the way. So, anyone here from Croatia, by the way? So, there are two, you could say like two basic ways of thinking about, two basic philosophies of how a society should operate. One concept is the totalitarian concept. In the, as in 20th century totalitarianism. And the totalitarian political philosophy is that you cannot, as a member of a society, you cannot do anything unless you're given permission. You cannot do anything unless you're given permission. So that sometimes I've gotten letters from leaders saying, who gave you permission to do this? And what I was doing is, well, Prabhupada gave me permission. There's another concept, which is that in a free society, which Prabhupada wanted us to be, in a Brahminical society, you can do anything if you follow the rules. So it's not that you can't do anything unless you're given permission. It's rather you can do anything. For example, I'm in Serbia right now, obviously. Or this is a very sophisticated hologram. And at the end of the lecture, I'll tell you which one it is. So the point is, now that I'm in Serbia, if I follow the law of Serbia, I can do whatever I want. I can go where I want. I can do what I want. That's the way free societies operate. Prabhupada never wanted ISKCON to be a totalitarian society where you can't do anything unless someone gives you permission. In fact, Prabhupada said that idea would destroy ISKCON. That's Prabhupada. Prabhupada, it's in my paper. Prabhupada said, he called it bureaucracy, where one person makes a decision for everybody else, and then everybody else has to do what one person says, and only that person can decide that you can use this or that. Prabhupada said that will ruin this movement. Prabhupada did not come to create a Shudra society. He came to create a Brahmin society. And it's the nature of Brahmins that they cooperate, they follow the rules. They're not anarchists, but every one of us who follows reasonable rules, for example, ISKCON cannot have a law that no one can do anything unless someone gives them permission. Like you can't. No. We all have a natural right to go out and preach. Prabhupada wanted all of us to be leaders. Prabhupada wanted all of us to be leaders. So that, for example, if you look at Prabhupada's teachings on that verse, Amara Gai Guru Hoy, by my order, become a guru, Prabhupada wasn't saying that don't even think about becoming a guru, that's way too high for you, only a few people. No, he said exactly the opposite. He said that you are being irresponsible if you don't become a guru. Now, whether you become a Diksha guru or Shiksha guru or Vartma Pradarshka guru or whatever, that's a detail. For example, Prabhupada was speaking to a group of businessmen in Nairobi, Hindu businessmen, and telling these Hindu businessmen, you have to be gurus. And he said, now, because you have families, you're still doing business, it might not be appropriate to be a Diksha guru, but you have to be a guru. So Prabhupada actually, think of what Lord Chaitanya said. And he said this to a householder, a Brahmin. He said it to a householder that Amara Gyai, by my order, Guru Hoy, the word Hoy in Bengali is the imperative form of the verb. Become a guru. It's a direct order. And Prabhupada has explained that Lord Chaitanya was actually giving this order to all of us. So that was Prabhupada's vision. It doesn't matter whether one is a householder or a sannyasi. I was with Prabhupada. I remember he was answering letters in 1972. Prabhupada was very efficient, so for his health, because of health considerations, he would get a massage every day, and then during his massage, not to waste time, he would answer his letters. The secretary would come in, read the letters, and probably reply to them. So I remember in 1972, months after I took sannyas, Prabhupada was getting letters from devotees asking to take sannyas. And Prabhupada kept saying over and over again, what is this sannyas? I mean, he was saying it's just that he kept saying it's a change of dress. It's a change of, now, to balance this, sannyas is an honorable ashram. And when I personally took sannyas, I found that it really strengthened my preaching. So I'm not trying to say it's nothing. But someone is not advanced just because they dress a certain way. Someone is not advanced just because they dress a certain way. Someone is not advanced just because they manage. They have some managerial position. It's not that because someone has a high managerial position, therefore they're pure devotees. It doesn't work that way. Because the history of religion, I mean, some people, for example, in high managerial positions are very advanced devotees. And some sannyasis are very advanced devotees. It's not, I'm not trying to say don't trust anyone. But we have to see by the behavior. Prabhupada was very anxious to establish that someone is not Krishna conscious just because they put on a certain kind of clothes, dress like a sannyasi. It doesn't make one Krishna conscious. You have to see the proper behavior. So what is the proper behavior for a leader, for a manager, for a sannyasi? We have to consider that in Vedic culture, there's a natural tension between equality and hierarchy. So on the one hand, there are natural hierarchies in the world. For example, parents naturally are responsible for their children. And gurus have a natural position to instruct their disciples. Even administratively, Prabhupada said there's GBC, there's temple presidents, there's secretary, treasurer. Prabhupada didn't include sannyasis in the management hierarchy. Anyway, some people know that. So, there are natural hierarchies. However, Krishna also emphasizes equality. For example, Krishna says, Pandita Samadarshana. Sama in Sanskrit means the same, equal. So, actually, when you, the Sanskrit S became a Persian H, like Sindhu becomes Hindu, and similarly Samo became Homo, the homo, like homogeneous in Greek. That's Sanskrit Samo. Anyway, so Krishna says Pandita Samadarshana. If people are wise, and sannyasis should be wise, we don't want an unwise sannyasi. But if a sannyasi is really wise, then he sees all creatures equally. Krishna says, Samoham sarva bhuteshu. I am equal to all living beings. Krishna says you can only achieve pure devotion if you respect the equality of all living beings. Samat sarveshu bhuteshu mad bhakti lavate param. So equality, just like nowadays equality is a big topic in the world, it's a big topic in Bhagavad Gita, which I explained in this book. Hi, my name is Hridayananda das Goswami. Okay. So, now, the point is, you know, I'm American, I have to sell something. So, the point here is that the hierarchy is external. The hierarchy belongs to the body. Just like Krishna says, I created the Varna system. Brahmins, Kshatriyas, it's a hierarchy. But Lord Chaitanya said, I'm not a Brahmana or Kshatriya, I'm not a sannyasi. Because the hierarchy between us is external. The quality is eternal. The quality is eternal. And so the only reason that Krishna personally institutes hierarchy in the material world is so that people can learn about equality. The goal is not hierarchy. The goal is equality. And so if someone claiming to be a spiritual leader is more concerned with hierarchy than equality, that person has a problem. The qualification of a bona fide guru, the qualification of a bona fide sannyasi, the qualification of a bona fide temple president, of a bona fide GBC, is that they are,
vjerodostojnog GBC-a učiti.
first of all, concerned with equality.
Jer su broj jedan zabrinuti da se bave jednakošću.
If someone is more concerned with hierarchy, like everyone has to do what I say, keep the women down. If someone is into hierarchy more than seeing that we're all equal, then how can that person be a spiritual leader?
Onda kako ta osoba može da bude duhovni vođa?
Because the whole qualification to be a guru,
Kvalifikacija da bude učitelj
for me, is that I don't think I'm better than you.
je da ja ne mislim da sam ja bolji od vas.
Now, if I think I'm better than you,
Mislim sam bolji
how
od
am I a
vas.
guru?
Kako sam ja onda?
Now, I'll give you an example. Let's say you have a brother,
Recimo imate brata
and let's say your brother is sick,
i vaš brat je bolest,
and you are healthy,
a vi ste zdravi
and so you're helping your brother.
i vi pomožete bratu.
You don't think you're better than your brother.
Mislite da ste bolji od svog brata.
You don't think you're better than your brother.
Mislite da ste bolji od svog brata.
He's just a little sick. You have to
On je
help him.
samo malo bolest, treba da mu pomoći.
So, we're all originally Krishna conscious.
I mi smo svi originalno svesni Krishna.
So, if there's another soul,
Ako postoji drugi,
let's say I have a disciple who may not be as spiritually healthy right now as I am.
duhovno zdrav trenutno.
That doesn't mean I think I'm better than that
Ali
person.
to ne znači da sam ja bolji.
So people who really think they're better,
I ljudi
or who
koji
really
stvarno-
think men are better than women,
ili stvarno
or who
misle da su
really
tako
think
bolji
that
od žena.
gurus are better than disciples,
Misle da su učitelji bolji od drugih.
these people really need to go back to the basics of Krishna consciousness.
Ovi ljudi stvarno moraju da se vrate osnovnom svesnom.
And the Hare Krishna movement will only succeed
Hare Krishna pokret će jedino uspeti
if its leaders, including
ako
myself,
njegovi vođe uključujući
are not hypocrites.
nisu
Because if you look at all the
pogledajte sve
human institutions in history, all the many kinds of human institutions, probably the champion
verovatno šampion
for hypocrisy
za lice
is a religious institution.
su religijski
I mean, what institution in the history of the world has demonstrated more hypocrisy than religious institutions?
više licemere nego religijski.
So, our job is not merely to criticize everybody else in the world.
Sve druge u svetu.
We should have at least a little bit of self-criticism.
Trebalo bi da imamo bar malo samo
You know, there's a tendency, if you look at the propaganda, magazines and movies, it's like, we're perfect and you have a problem.
Mi smo savršeni i vi imate problem.
But the good news is we're here to help you.
Ali dobro stvar je da smo ovdje da vam pomognemo.
You know, we're all happy, we're all perfect, we're just blissfully eating pakoras and selling
Mi u
books.
okruženstvu jedemo pakore i tako dalje.
And so this idea that it's somehow offensive
Da je nekako
to be honest about ourselves,
pogrešno i uvredljivo da
Or
budemo
it's a-
iskreni sa sobom.
Prabhupada wanted
Zapravo
an
želimo
intelligent, rational, brahminical society
racionalno društvo,
where people are humble,
gde su
not just
ljudi
leaders who are not humble telling everyone else to
da
be humble,
vođe koji nisu ponizni da govore drugima.
but a movement where the leaders show the example of never thinking they're better than other people.
Gde vođe pokazuju
I mean, just like, for example, if a doctor treats you,
kao na primjer kad te doktor
the doctor doesn't think he's better than you or she is better than you, or it, no, just you.
ili on
The doctor doesn't think that I'm better than you.
da sam ja bolje.
The doctor just thinks, okay,
On samo misli
you know some things I don't know, I know something you don't know, like medicine. I'm just here to help you.
Toga sam tu da ti pomognem.
Imagine if a doctor thinks I'm better than you.
Kad bi doktor mislio da sam bolje.
We're supposed to be spiritual leaders.
Mi bi trebalo da budemo duhovni vođe.
We can't just, a spiritual leader can't become obsessed with telling everyone else what to do.
Ne može da postane
And ignoring what
tim
Prabhupada
šta-
told him to
da
do.
govori drugima šta da rade, a da ignoreš šta je njemu rekao Prabhupada da rade.
So, for example, parents and children.
Na primjer, roditelji i deca.
Loving parents don't think they're better than the children. Actually, any loving mother or father
Zapravo svako
thinks that their child is more important than them,
koji
isn't it?
voli svoje decu misle da su deca važnije.
Any loving parent sees their child as more important.
Svaki roditelj pun ljubavi misli
Even though the parent has a responsibility. So that's the mood of a spiritual leader, that you are more important. That I'm not better than you. In fact, you know, I have to think first of you.
Već zapravo treba prvo da mislimo na
And my goal is to make you an autonomous, leader in this movement. My goal is that you become a leader. I don't want to keep you, in a perpetual state of childhood, so that, for the disciple to be an adult is somehow offensive. We can't have a movement where it's offensive to be an adult. So, and Prabhupada wanted us to talk about these things. We're not breaking the laws of ISKCON. We're not offending anyone. But that was Prabhupada's vision of ISKCON. A movement of intelligent, sincere adults who sit down together and talk about things openly. And it's not that if you disagree on any point, you're an offender. So, as you can see, I have a few items of concern. And so just to wrap it up, because I want to tie up all the loose ends, as they say, I began with that verse on Purnamadat Purnamidam. And so Krishna is complete. And, okay, I'll get back. So I don't want you to think that because of my age, I can't remember what I said at the beginning. I'll prove to you that I'm still lucid. I was making that point about the study of language. So if you look at philosophical Sanskrit, it's very sophisticated. And they have these little sort of concise, abbreviated ways of saying things. So the word idam, grammatically is a demonstrative pronoun.
Sorry?
Oh. That's demonstrative pronoun. How do you say
No,
that?
not before that.
Oh.
Before that.
The word idam.
The word idam. Reč idam koja se pominja u ovom sliku je?
Yeah, demonstrative
Pokazna
pronoun.
Je pokazna zamjenica.
And in Sanskrit, like in English, or in Sanskrit, you could say this, that, or that one, the one farther. So it's a question of proximity to the speaker. So idam is the closest, this. And so because this indicates something that you can point to, therefore it indicates some existing thing that is very close to you. It actually just means that, therefore, in philosophical Sanskrit, idam means this world. It's very interesting, elegant speech. So when the philosophers in Sanskrit or in Shastra want to say this world, they just say idam. This. And if they mean the other world, the higher world, they just say that. And so that's the Isa Upanishad. It's using this very elegant, condensed Sanskrit. So, Om Purnamidam Purnamadam. This here is complete, that is complete. And then Purnat Purnamudachyate. The complete comes from the complete. Now, let's say you have a glass of lemonade. And you fill up another glass of lemonade. The first glass is empty. So I hope you have the second glass. But anyway, that's the idea. In the material world, if you take everything out of a container, you have an empty container. So the Isa Upanishad says, Purnat Purnamudachyate. The complete is taken from the complete, but Purnasya Purnamadaya, even taking the complete from the complete, Purnameva Vashishate. The original remains complete. And so that's the sense in which we give the example of the hand and the body. It's analogous because you're part of Krishna and we have to serve Krishna. It's not analogous in the sense that there's this special spiritual relationship where we're part of Krishna, but he is still complete. Krishna is not the sum of his parts. So this is spiritual math. Anyway, so any questions on these points? Yes.
Thank you for wonderful lectures.
Thank you for coming.
Lepo si nas izbombardilo sa velikom količinom transcendentalnog znanja i
Always
analitikom.
great quantity of transcendental knowledge.
kao Ameri NATO 99, ali ovo je bilo...
Like
What?
only 99, but this was transcendental.
I hope that it's better.
Srbija je mnogo veća nego Surčin, Beograd.
Serbia is much bigger than Surčin, than the airport, than from the airport.
Moje pitanje.
His question.
Širopravnik je želeo da svi njegovi učenici i učenici njegovih učenika i učenici onih učenika budu guruji.
Srila Prabhupada wanted all of his disciples and disciples of disciples and disciples of disciples of disciples to be gurus.
Yes, absolutely.
Iskon je trebao po Srila Prabhupada zamisli da bude pokret, a nikako organizacija.
ISKCON was meant to be a movement, not an organization.
It's actually meant to be both. Because, for example, without organization, how can we even have a program?
Organizacija zatvara jedan pokret i čini ga sektom.
Closes one movement and makes it a sectarian.
Okay, let's look at that.
Ajde pogledamo na to.
But thank you for bringing that up.
Ajde pričamo.
Da.
No, but first let's look at this.
Samo sekundu
And then
pogledamo.
we'll go on to the other
I
one.
onda ćemo da nastavimo.
Because what we need to do, I think, is
Vidimo.
take what you said,
Da uzmemo ovo što se...
and I'm going to try to repeat what you
Ja
said
ću pokušati to
in the form of a formal argument.
U formi formalnog
Because when you put things
Jer kad staviš stvari
in the shape of a formal argument,
u oblik formalnog argumenta,
then you can examine the validity of the argument.
onda možeš da vidiš kolika je validnost toga što si uopšte rekao.
So, okay, the first thing, I would say the first thing, which is, and also that there are, how should I put it, when people make arguments, sometimes there are premises
Pa nekad postoje
which
neke
are
osnovne
implicit,
zamisli
but not explicitly stated.
koje se unutra podrazumevaju, nisu eksplicitno izgovorene.
So I think the first implicit premise that I
Mislim da prva
believe I
implicitna
noticed
premisa koju sam primetio si rekao,
is just that it's possible
je da je moguće
for a group of people
za grupu
to
ljudi
be a movement but not an organization.
da budu pokret, a ne organizacija.
And so I think just the very possibility
Ja
of
mislim da
being,
tamo
let's say, being an efficient movement
da budemo kao efektivan pokret,
rather than a chaotic movement, but it being an efficient movement
haotičan pokret,
but
znači
not an organization,
pokret, a ne organizacija.
I think that sociology might not support that.
Da sociologija ne podržava to.
But then there was another point,
Ali onda postoji druga
which
poruka.
is that that an organization
Da organizacija
will necessarily
će neminovno
become corrupted.
postati korumpirana.
And now we can also distinguish two
Hoćemo
kinds of
razlikovati
corruption.
dve stvari korupcije, dve različite vrste korupcije.
One level of corruption is something which is correctable.
Je nešto što se može ispraviti.
For example, sometimes the body becomes corrupted and we have to take medicine and go to a doctor. However, there are also fatal corruptions.
Također postoji fatalna
In
korupcija.
other words, corruptions which cannot be
Koje
corrected
se ne mogu
and which ultimately
i koje konačno
destroy the
do
organization
uništenja
or
organizacije.
render it so hypocritical
Ili ga
or
napravi
so
toliko
corrupted
licemjernim i
that it actually does more harm than
da
good.
zapravo čini više štete nego koristi.
So again, I would question
Ja ponovo
respectfully
postavljam
whether history would actually confirm that.
da li istorija potvrđuje ovo.
For example,
Na primjer,
let us say there's a new medical discovery
recimo da postoji neko novo medicinsko otkriće.
and many people in a country need a particular medicine.
I mnogo ljudi u toj zemlji treba.
Now someone could say that
Kaže,
medicine should be made available but not by an organization.
da lek treba da bude dostupan, ali ne kroz
In other
organizaciju.
words, there should be no health ministry.
Ne bi trebalo da postoji neka vrsta
There should simply there should be no organization.
Jednostavno treba da ne bude
Just
organizacija.
whoever believes in this medicine should just go and give it to other people.
Treba da ide da ga daje drugima.
And we could say this, I mean, I think you could give examples from many different aspects of life.
Primjera iz raznih oblasti života.
We could say that there should be teachers in Serbia, but there should be no educational institutions.
Trebalo bi da postoje učitelji u Srbiji, ali nikakve edukativne institucije.
I'm not sure that really works.
Nisam sigurna da to stvarno
And I mean, we can give many examples from history of efficient institutions or organizations, and of course of corrupt ones also. But I don't think we can give many examples of the efficient transmission of medicine or the efficient transmission of education in the absence of an organization. So, also, you know the old saying, we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. So, we have to avoid what is called the pendulum effect. And I mean, you got that?
Yeah.
So, okay. Actually, Plato talks about this. Plato explains that one political extreme will produce an equal and opposite extreme. So, for example, tyranny will tend to produce anarchy or democracy, Plato said. And democracy, because it's often not very efficient, will tend to produce some form of stronger government. Just like we're seeing now in many countries, including America, sort of a resurgence of a type of political extremism. And we see the rise of extreme political parties in France and Holland, the Brexit in England, and so on. So, in our case, we don't want to fall into this pendulum. So if we see an institution that in some ways is not, how should I put it, properly or efficiently governing itself, the solution is good government. For example, if you don't want to eat bad food, the solution is not starvation. The solution is good food. It's just like nowadays people, because of their experience with bad religious institutions, think that we don't need it. But what's happening is, there's a saying in English, nature abhors a vacuum. Yeah, and so if we create an institutional vacuum, then we just get bad institutions. So, yeah, it's just the real world. And I don't think we can show empirically that organizations necessarily become so corrupt that they do more harm than good. In fact, one last point, then you can talk. Okay, just one. But then you can talk. In fact, ironically, if you study human behavior, scientifically study human behavior, you find that human beings are so prone to organize themselves that the only way you can prevent human beings from organizing themselves is by having an organization that prevents that. It's like, for example, let's say, for example, there's a train wreck somewhere out in the country, far from any city. What will human beings do? They start organizing themselves. All right, you go that way to see if you can find a farmhouse. And you go that way, and someone has to take care of these wounded people, injured people. In other words, self-organization is actually, it's just our neurological nature. And so the only way to prevent bad organization is
Jedini
good
način
organization.
da spriječiš lošu organizaciju je dobra organizacija.
Možda nisam bio dovoljno jasan.
Maybe I wasn't clear enough.
Okay.
Počet ću s jednog drugog duhovnog aspekta. Svaki guru, pravi,
Every
sannyasi.
single guru and sannyasi,
bez obzira iz koje sampradaje dolazi,
whichever sampradaya he comes from,
ima Krišnu u srcu i njegov uloga je da deli Krišnu.
has Krishna in his heart and his role is to share Krishna.
Of course.
Ne da prenosi znanje iz svoje sampradaje,
Not to give further the knowledge from his own sampradaya.
Not to
Nego da-
understand.
Not to give knowledge of a sampradaya, but to connect with Krishna. Jel to da ne daje
da,
znanje
nego
sampradaya, nego da
prisutnost Krišne, da u ovom
to bring
momentu,
Krishna personally there.
But okay, just one point, then you can continue. I'm going to let
Okay,
go
samo
on.
ovu pointu pa ćeš onda.
You can go on, you can continue, but sampradaya just means the community.
Sampradaya znači zajednica.
And Krishna himself says the knowledge comes through the sampradaya.
Da znanje dolazi
From
kroz
God.
sampradaya.
But anyway, go ahead.
sve redu, ali suština gurua
Yes.
i
The
sanjasije
essence
da
of
svog
a
učenika
teacher is that his disciple.
What's that? What's that?
The essence of a teacher is that his disciple
da učenika poveže sa paramatmom.
to connect the disciple with Paramatma.
Jer svaki guru i sanjasije su institucija za sebe. I oni
Because
vide,
every teacher
sam ti
is
rekao,
an institution
sa
for
istim
them.
očima.
That one?
And Socrates saw everything with the same eyes. But can you frame it? Možeš pitanje samo, ja ću pitanje.
Nije od početka nas je. Zašto pokret nije uspeo? Jer guruji nisu ostvarili ono što je Šriprabhupada
Šta je to
želeo.
pitanje?
Zašto pokret nije
Aha.
uspeo? Do sada, mislim,
Why
malo više
did
njih
the
vidiš
movement
programi
did
težnje.
not succeed if the teachers did what Prabhupada
I
wanted?
pokret je ostao na nivou sekte.
It
Kako se
it
tumači
is left
sve?
on the level of a cult, of a sect.
Yes. I mean, I'm making a critique of, let's say, of ISKCON.
Ja, na primjer, činim kritiku.
But I'm a member of ISKCON.
Ali sam također i član isto.
I mean, I've made what I believe is a rational decision
Ja sam učinio nešto što mislim da je
that
racionalno.
ISKCON is Prabhupada's movement,
Da iskon jeste Prabhupada pokret.
that there are many wonderful devotees in
Da
ISKCON,
postoje tu mnogo divnih fakta.
and that the world is benefiting greatly because devotees do organize.
I da svijet dobija puno toga što se bakte organizuju.
And the guru is not an isolated figure.
A guru nije izolovana figura.
If you study the history of Gaudiya Vaishnava,
Ako studiraš istoriju Gaudiya
you find that gurus were members of communities,
guru su bili članovi zajednice.
and that it is the community which preserves knowledge.
Zapravo zajednica ta koja očuvala znanje.
I mean, a guru can give knowledge to his disciple.
Guru može dati znanje svom
The
učeniku.
disciple walks out the door and gets hit by a truck,
I učenik izađe i udari ga kamion.
and the knowledge is finished.
I znanje sa znanjem je gotovo.
It's just like, for example, in Serbia, there's a history.
Naprimjer, u Srbiji postoji istorija.
And the history of Serbia is preserved by the community of Serbs.
Je očuvana od strane zajednice Srba.
It's the Serb society,
Zapravo društvo
through its educational institutions,
svoje edukativne
museums,
muzeje,
schools,
škole,
and cultural programs.
kulturnog programa.
It is the society
To je društvo
that is preserving its own
koje
history.
zapravo čuva svoju sopstvenu istoriju.
So, the idea of the guru who's just absolutely independent
Gdje je
is,
guru koja je potpuno nezavisna.
that's just not the way Lord Chaitanya.
Zapravo nije način na koji je gospodin Chaitanya uopšte
So wherever Lord, if you look at the six Goswamis, they were all working within communities.
Činili u okviru zajednice.
So as far as being sectarian,
Sve dok se tiče sektaštva, pominjem tu
to
pitanje.
be honest, there probably are devotees in ISKCON who are sectarian.
Koji su
Devotees in ISKCON.
sektaški, se ponašaju sektaški.
And there are probably, I'm sure there are people in every other human institution that are
I
sectarian.
verovatno isto svako drugoj ljudskoj instituciji.
For example, university departments tend to be sectarian.
Naprimjer, te akademske zajednice, delovi na univerzitetu.
It's very common that the professors in a department will not hire anyone unless they think like the professor.
Vrlo je uobičajeno da neće zaposliti nikog ko misli bilo kako drugačije.
Even if someone thinks differently but actually has good ideas.
Neko misli različito, ima dobre ideje, neće da zaposli.
So there's an old saying, you probably have it in Serbian, good fences make good neighbors. Good fences.
Aha, postoji izreka da dobre ograde čine dobre susede.
For example, imagine a village in Serbia.
Zamislite selo u Srbiji,
Everyone is friends,
svi su prijatelji,
everyone helps everyone else,
svi pomažu drugima,
but they have their own houses.
ali imaju svoje kuće.
And you have to respect
I moraš da poštuješ.
that that's not your house, that's your neighbor's
To je
house.
tvoja kuća. Izbacuj džupu.
So you have to respect that this is your house, but that's your neighbor's house.
Moraš da poštuješ to da je ovo tvoja kuća, a ono je tvoj komšija.
You have to respect that these are my children,
Da su ovo moja deca.
and I have the authority to instruct my children,
Autoritet da ih te imaju.
but those are my neighbor's children.
Ali ovo su deca mog komšija.
And I don't have the authority to instruct my neighbor's children.
A autoritet da im dajem instrumente.
So it's not that's not sectarian,
To nije sektaštvo,
that's civilization.
to je civilizacija.
So knowledge comes down in communities,
Znanje dolazi kroz zajednice
and peace and harmony, let's say among Vaishnav
i
groups,
harmonija među Vajšnavom grupom
is maintained by mutual respect.
se održava međusobnim poštovanjem.
So there are, you could say, bona fide Vaishnav gurus and other organizations,
Verodostojni Vajšnavski guru i u drugim organizacijama.
and I don't feel I have the authority or the right to go and instruct the disciples of those gurus.
Ja ne mislim da imam priliku i pravo da idem i da dajem instrukcije učenicima koji budućih.
Because my parents taught me to respect other people.
Jer su me roditelji naučili da poštujem druge ljude.
I think it's a question, I mean, sometimes what we've actually found, frankly,
Ono što smo našli u
if I can be very honest here,
Ako mogu da budem vrlo iskren,
is that certain groups that I personally call the Godia Vikings,
koje ja zovem Gaudija Vikinzi.
they use this argument that don't be very cynical argument.
To je vrlo jedan ciničan argument.
It's like saying that, if I go and steal your children, then I say don't be sectarian.
Ukradem decu, onda kažem pa nemoj da budeš sektaš.
So Vedic civilization is just that, it's civilization.
Upravo to, civilizacija.
It's not anarchy.
Nije anarhija.
It's not that everyone just does whatever they want. It's civilization.
Radi ono što mu hoće, to je civilizacija.
And
It's so sad for me because this is,
Loše za
I feel, I feel like this is my life, this is my only family.
Ali ovo je
So
moj
what
život,
is
ovo
your
je
practical
jedna
advice?
porodica, koja je vaš praktičan savjet?
good, good point.
Dobar plan.
It's part of survival.
To je da je
No,
ovo...
I have felt exactly like you many times.
Puno puta sam se osjetio isto tako kao ti sad.
I mean, there are some things you can do like throwing your furniture against the wall,
Naprimjer, možda reći stvari pa da bacaš namještaj u zid.
but that's probably more for guys than girls. That's more for guys than
A,
girls.
i to je više za dečake nego za...
No, I understand what you're saying, and especially, frankly, honest, some parts of the world are more unusual than other parts.
Iskreno, neki se delovi sveta su više neobični nego drugi.
For example, to be honest, in America, I think there's more freedom in ISKCON in America.
Mislim da ima više slobode u iskonu u Americi.
In Europe,
U
in
Evropi,
some parts of Europe,
u nekim
there's
delovima
significantly less freedom.
postoji značajno manje slobode.
And so that's why,
Zato-
you know that I wrote a paper on these things.
Znaš da sam napisao esej o ovim stvarima.
So, I really understand how you feel,
Ja
because I've felt the same way many
Znam
times.
kako se osjećaš jer si ja tako osjećam.
But we have begun to correct this,
Ali mi smo počeli da radimo na
and
sređenju.
that's why I came here.
I zato sam došao.
Because I'm going to many places, and to be honest, some people don't want me to travel because they don't want. They think that they may lose control over everything if someone comes and actually gives you other ideas, even if they're Prabhupada's ideas. So The time has come when we really need to work together, all of us. In many countries, I was just in England, and many devotees responded. In America, many devotees responded. And I was in Boston, I mean, Los Angeles, everywhere. You know, all over the world, many devotees, thousands of devotees responded. And so you are not alone. So I think that's the real thing you need to understand is you are not all alone. There are thousands and thousands of good, intelligent, faithful devotees in this movement who support you and understand how you feel. So yeah, we have to do this, you know, together, send kirtan. Lord Chaitanya gave the example of the garden where you plant the seed of bhakti or the seed of bhakti planted in the garden of the heart. Bhakti lata bij. Americans say bhakti lata bij, but bhakti lata bij. And then it grows, but as the plant grows, the weeds also grow. For example, we water our devotional creeper by chanting Hare Krishna. But also, let's say someone chanting and becomes proud. Not you. No, I can see you at a you were very sincere. But let's say someone's speaking. Let's say someone's speaking or someone's in a big position. And so on the one hand, they're watering their garden, they're doing spiritual service as a leader, but they're also watering their own pride. They're actually increasing their own idea that, you know, I should tell everyone what to do, or everyone has to do what I want them to do. So the weeds are growing. Weeds are growing. And so my point is that these weeds grow not only in individuals, whether they're small devotees or big devotees. These weeds grow not only in individuals, they grow in a society. They grow in a community. And so what we found is we just celebrated ISKCON 50. And I think the most remarkable thing about all those hundreds and hundreds of celebrations is that there was not one word of self-analysis. Not one word. Not one word of self-criticism. Not one word of introspection. You know, continuing this sort of ridiculous style of presenting ourselves as wonderful and perfect to the public. And ignoring the fact that we also need to correct ourselves. So, if you have a society or leadership of a society that has institutionalized never criticizing themselves, it's like in your individual life. If you never look at yourself and see what your faults are, you will really go off the track. All of us need to regularly take an honest look at ourselves. And a society needs to take an honest look at itself. But when you have a culture where it's offensive to do that, when you have a culture where certain leaders will never criticize themselves, and they won't allow anyone else to criticize them, and these people are actually controlling the society, the only possible result is problems. There's no other possible result. The only possible result would be injustice and bad decisions. I mean, this is just the way the real world is. We're talking about the real world. ISKCON is a spiritual movement. I'm a member of ISKCON for Prabhupada. But we are still under the laws of nature. There's actually, I explain this everywhere, there's a philosophical misunderstanding that's common. That, as we know, Rupa Goswami says, when you surrender to Krishna, then you're freed of your karma. Some people think that means you're free of the laws of nature. But we're not. We are in the process of becoming purified. But we can't say now we're perfectly pure. And just because someone has some title in ISKCON doesn't mean that person is pure because of their title. Especially if their behavior does not seem pure. And so, if you look at governments around the world,
Ako pogledate vlade širom svijeta,
practically every country in the world where there are not strong NGOs,
gdje ne postoje jaki nevladine
you find bad government.
nalazite loše.
If you look at first world countries, actually there are
Drugog svijeta,
institutes that study these things.
oni koji
And
su
they study the level of corruption or transparency in
nivou
governments, in national
korupcije i
governments.
transparencije u nacionalnim
And basically, all the most corrupt countries
sve najkorumpiranije
do not have these strong NGOs.
nemaju jake NGO.
And all of the countries that are more honest do have.
Sve iskrenije zemlje imaju.
If you look at Prabhupada's,
Ako pogledate
so what I'm trying to say is, even though we're devotees,
iako smo bakti,
if you know, as I always say, if a karmi, a jnani, a yogi, and a Vaishnava all jump off this building,
svi su
they'll all fall exactly at the same
svi
speed,
su da padnu
according to the laws of physics.
prema zakonima fizike.
And so you see in the early days of the movement, that devotees thought, for example, because I'm eating prasadam, I'm beyond the laws of nutrition. And many Prabhupada disciples left this world prematurely because of that belief. Or, I don't need to exercise, I don't need to eat healthy food. Or, and there are even more catastrophic examples. For example, in the early days of the movement, you had all these parents who thought, I'm selling Prabhupada's books, I don't have to spend a lot of time with my children. And the result was a disaster. So the idea here is that even if you are a devotee, you have to follow the laws of nature. Not only physical laws like gravity and nutrition, but there are sociological laws. For example, the iron law of oligarchy, which is in sociology, the idea that when you have rule by the few, and you have like, for example, ISKCON is ruled by an oligarchy. And that's what Prabhupada established. Prabhupada established it, and so that's our system. However, social science shows that oligarchies have a problem in that they tend to become more and more concerned with their own power and their own authority. And they begin to think that if we keep our authority, everything will be all right. And so you find that, for example, in the oligarchy of ISKCON, in the last several years, most of the papers they publish are all about why everyone should do what they say. For example, there hasn't been one paper about justice for devotees in general. There hasn't been one paper about how to revive our Western mission. Only papers about why everyone should follow them. And so this history, again, I'm not against Prabhupada's system, I'm trying to strengthen it, I'm trying to help it. But here's another point. In ISKCON, the word political tends to be a bad word. Like if someone can say to you, oh, you're being political. The problem here is, the Prabhupada used the word like that. The problem is, that's not the primary meaning of the word political. If you look at a dictionary, the first meaning is simply something related to the exercise of power or authority. In ISKCON, some people do exercise authority, and therefore ISKCON has a political dimension. Political doesn't just mean doing things for the wrong motive or trying. Political simply means the exercise of authority, and there is political science. There is political science. And so what we actually need is, let me make another point. Thank you for being patient, listening to this. I'm trying to explain. Take psychology. Even if you don't study psychology, you have a psychologist. People who don't study psychology think, no, I'm just normal. But when you study psychology, you realize you have a specific psychology. Now, in the same way, here's the basic problem in ISKCON, in terms of leadership. The basic problem is, in terms of political science, that, first of all, we have Prabhupada's mandate. Prabhupada said in the first line of his will, the GBC shall be the ultimate managing authority of ISKCON.
Znači Prabhupada je postavio
So
kako
that
u
is
svom,
Prabhupada's
u
mandate.
svom
Now, we
testamentu
have
da je
something else,
GBC konačni
which is a group of devotees who hold positions on the GBC body
bakri koji drže
and
poziciju
who,
u GBC telu i koji
exercise authority.
iskazuju moć.
Now, it's just like someone who doesn't study psychology doesn't know they have a specific psychology.
Čak i kao neko
So people who don't study political science
konkretnu psihologiju, ti koji
don't
studiraju
understand they have a specific political philosophy.
ne shvataju da imaju specifičnu
And so
političku
people
filozofiju.
may naively think
I onda mogu
that
naivno
Prabhupada
misliti
gave this order and I'm just carrying it out.
ovo naređenje ga sam
So there are just two things here.
tu samo dve
There's
stvari.
Prabhupada's order,
Prabhupadovo naređenje
there's my exercising of power.
i moje izražavanje
However, there's a third thing,
moći.
which
Postoji
people
treća
are,
stvar,
many leaders are not conscious of.
od koje su mnogi
That third thing
svjesni, a ta treća
Is
stvar
a particular political philosophy which mediates, which is in the middle between Prabhupada's order. Prabhupada's order, in their minds, is filtered through a political philosophy, and then they act.
Ono što oni ne shvataju da
Now, what we can do as
filozofija
rational human
između
beings
tog instrukcije
and as
Prabhupada
devotees
kako
is,
oni daju.
we can look at that, even if they don't know they have a political philosophy, they have one. It's like you have to have the psychology. If you exercise power, you have to have a political philosophy.
Ako izražavaš moć, moraš da
It's just like there's no such thing as music in general. There are only specific kinds of music.
To je specijalne,
And there's no such thing as just being an ultimate managing authority. There are only specific ways to be an ultimate managing
neka
authority.
vrsta samo ultimativnog autoriteta.
Now,
Postoje način da
my
bi si
claim
ultimativnog autoriteta.
Is that if you study Prabhupada's political philosophy,
Studiraš
and you study the
Prabhupada
political philosophy of some people claiming to represent Prabhupada,
političku
they don't
filozofiju
match.
nekih koji tvrde da ga slede
They
i
don't
gdje se
match.
ne poklapaju.
For example, Prabhupada said ISKCON is meant to, I'm not talking about everyone, there's some very good leaders in this movement,
Ne govorimo samo postoji
happy
mnogo
followers, and everything. But some places there's a lot of unhappy people,
ali
as we know.
na nekim mjestima postoji
And
puno
so-
sličnih ljudi.
Prabhupada, for example, said he wanted a constitutional society.
Ne žele-
In other words,
društvo
the
koje-
lawmakers are not above the law. It's like if the, what do you call it, parliament in Serbia?
Što ovdje imate?
Congress.
Jest parliament.
So much in politics.
Parliament.
Parliament.
But you're following, right, what I'm saying?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so for example, if the parliament in Serbia makes a law that you can't kill people,
Donesi zakon da ne možeš ubiti ljude.
the members of parliament can't say, well, we can kill people
Ne
because we
mogu
made
oni
the
koji
law.
su u parlamentu reći
This is
mi
all you
možemo
can't
mi
kill.
smo doneli zakon.
In other words,
Na drugi
in a
način,
constitutional society, the lawmaker is not above the law.
u društvu kojem vlada ustav, oni koji donose ustav nisu iznad njega.
Now, the idea that European countries must be constitutional, the idea that you cannot have absolute
Da
monarchy,
ne možeš da imaš apsolutnu monarhiju.
this idea actually was spread in Europe by Napoleon.
U Evropi donio Napoleon.
Yes, even though he was a little theatrical and proud of
Iako je
himself,
bio malo teatričan,
apart from that, he actually spread the idea
zapravo on je raširio tu
of constitutionalism.
Uh,
And he was opposed by people that wanted absolute power. Okay?
Last sentence.
Oh.
Last sentence.
The people that wanted absolute power
Ljudi koji su želeli apsolutnu moć
opposed the idea of a constitution.
su se protivili toj ideji ustava.
Because with the constitution, the leader cannot do anything.
Onaj koji je vladao se ne može ništa uraditi.
He has to follow the law.
Mora da sledi zakon.
Prabhupada said many times he wanted ISKCON to be a constitutional society.
Da želi da ispod bude ustavno društvo.
In fact, he said it 40 years ago.
Zapravo to je rekao pre 40 godina.
And the people that have the responsibility to make that constitution have not done it.
Još uvijek to nisu uradili.
And because they have not done what Prabhupada
Nisu
said,
radili to,
and they have not created a constitution,
nisu stvorili ustav.
therefore,
Stoga,
they believe they can still do whatever they want.
da mogu da misle da mogu da rade što god žele.
So that's one example. Also, for example, in in ISKCON, the GBC accepted a list of principles which are called, in English, due process, or fair process.
Principa koji se zovu fair proces.
That means, I mean, these are universal. For example, if you are accused of a crime, you have a right to defend yourself. The people who are judging you must look at all the relevant evidence. You have a right to a trial within a reasonable amount of time. You can't be put in jail for 30 years and say we don't have room yet, we don't have time yet to. So these are universal principles of justice. And the GBC themselves accepted a list of these principles. And yet some of them don't follow it. Above the law. And when they don't follow them, nothing happens. So, I'm speaking to you about these things, not to make you a politician, but because rather than just become frustrated, rather than just be frustrated, rather than just leave ISKCON, we should be intelligent. We can intelligently analyze what's the problem. We can understand the problem. We can explain to other devotees what the problem is, and we can fix it. The more devotees know the problem, and the more devotees demand that the problem be fixed, the more the leaders will have to fix it. Because that's just the way societies work. It's like a little man on top of a big elephant. If the elephant really gets angry, the man is in trouble. So I'm not talking about revolution. I'm not talking about changing Prabhupada's system. I'm talking about the devotees of ISKCON becoming informed and demanding that the leaders follow Prabhupada's system, establish a fair constitution, give justice, follow Prabhupada's statement that the whole purpose of ISKCON is to help people to become independent, not simply under someone, that if either in ISKCON or in some particular country, if one person thinks that person should dictate and everyone has to follow, that will ruin ISKCON according to Prabhupada. We are followers of Prabhupada, and we have a right to insist that those who claim to represent Prabhupada actually follow him. And the more devotees understand this and speak this without defense. In my talk today, I don't think I've committed Vaishnava aparad. I have resisted the temptation to mention names. And I'm following Vaishnava etiquette. I'm simply trying to speak the truth as one of Prabhupada's most senior servants, because I think if we don't understand this truth, we're in big trouble. Not only because, and what really motivated me is not merely seeing too much injustice, but also what motivated me is we have a serious problem. Historical problem. You know, you can have a problem like you wake up with a headache, or someone, I don't know, stole your sweet ball or something. But we have a serious historical problem. The serious historical problem is that our movement is not growing in the West. Not only is it not growing, it appears from reliable statistics that it has been declining for about 40 years. Prabhupada made it very clear that his whole global strategy depended on his movement being successful in the Western world. And right now it's not. And I believe one of the main reasons Prabhupada's Western mission is not successful is because some leaders who personally are very attached to a very conservative, Indo-centric strategy, believe they have the right to stop other devotees from presenting things in a more Western way, even though Prabhupada himself, many times, dozens of times, authorized us to do that. I believe
Ja
that to
mislim
save our Western mission,
da bi spasili
and
svoju zapadnu misiju,
if we don't save the Western mission, the whole world's in trouble.
jer ako ne spasimo celo
We need to have the freedom
moramo da imamo
to
slobodu,
follow what Prabhupada said.
da sledimo
When he said that in the Western world we should take all risk, we should make all adjustments, we should, within our basic principles, we should do everything necessary to make Western people comfortable with us. And if some people, if some leaders think they can ignore Prabhupada's statements, they can ignore the freedom that Prabhupada gave us, and they can use their power, their managerial power, to force everyone to be like them against Prabhupada's teachings, that is actually an existential threat to ISKCON.
Učenje da je to zapravo egzistencijalna prijetnja za ISKCON.
And so, you know, like you, I mean, I know exactly how you feel. Believe me, I know how you feel. But I came to a point. I'll tell you what happened in my life about my
Reći ću šta
frustration.
se desilo u mom životu.
I was really frustrated. I was very angry
Bio sam vrlo
because you
frustriran,
don't know all the things I've witnessed and experienced.
neću da govorim što
And
se
so I thought I need to write a paper
Ja sam mislio napisati
about how ISKCON is being done.
o tome kako se deluje ISKCON.
And I sat down to write it.
I onda sam sela
And I did research because,
I onda sam uradio
you know, having done the academic thing,
jer dolazeći iz
I wanted to write a serious paper. I wanted to be diligent and responsible. I'm going to write a serious paper, make sure my facts
da budem
are
siguran
lined
da
up
su
and so
moje
on.
činjenice na mestu.
And as I began to write this paper,
Dok sam pisao ovaj papir,
I realized, oh my God,
shvatio sam,
this is much bigger than me.
ovo je mnogo veće.
At first I was angry, I'm going to write a paper. But as I worked on this paper, I realized this is so much bigger than me. This is not about me. This is about saving ISKCON. This is about correcting things and making sure that ISKCON is what Prabhupada wanted. That devotees have the freedom to do what they have to do in Serbia and every country and Croatia, to do what they have to do according to their best understanding to grow this movement. So that's how I got over my frustration. Because I realized that people like you and other devotees from other places, I realized, and all over the world, especially the Western world, that, you know, if I was treated in a certain way or I saw certain things, what about the other people? It's really, I really have to serve these people. I have to do everything in my power to help these other devotees. And once I understood that, I didn't care so much about myself. You know, I'm an adult. I'll live. You know, I'll get my prasadam and chant my Hare Krishna. So that's what I realized. That Prabhupada needs us. And so many devotees need us. Hare Krishna. Thank you. It's a pleasure to meet you. So anything else? Yes. What's that? Sad? I think it's really ecstatic because I mean I think Krishna is empowering us now to help him. So I was just in England. There's so many nice devotees. It's amazing. And here, I mean, there's just all around the world. There's so many great people who have come to this movement, and so it's ecstatic that we can try to help them. Yes. Oh, no. Oh, I'm sorry. You've been trying to ask a question.
No, after this, it's not so relevant, I feel. Maybe there's some other, Vaikuntha Nitai Prabhu, he wanted,
Okay.
I think, maybe.